let's go ahead and get started. So welcome. As usual, I am Chef Amy, and I am coming to you live from the kitchen here at Willamette Valley Kitchen Company in Salem. And tonight we have what may be our final online class. I like online classes, so I don't know why I have my fingers crossed. I actually really enjoy them, but I know everybody wants to be done with masks, and it sounds like we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and we may be able to go back to in-person classes soon-ish, so we'll see what happens, but this is our last online class for now, and it is our third and final winter soup class. So we're coming into spring. There are bulbs popping up in my yard, but still nice weather for a winter soup. Tonight we are doing a Japanese-inspired soup. So it's a squash puree, which is a really common wintry soup, but I've just included some traditional Japanese ingredients to just give it something a little different and a little special. We'll be making that soup. It's pretty quick and easy. An optional topping is our roasted tofu bites, so if you opted to do that, again, make sure you have your oven preheated to 425. We'll be popping those in the oven pretty soon. And then our third little mini recipe is our ginger apple slaw, which is going to be either served on top of the squash soup, pairs really nicely, or if you don't feel like you're not into having slaw on top of soup, you can also, of course, just serve it on the side.
Well, we might be getting a little bit of a problem with
no problem.
data.
So hopefully you are all ready to go, and what we're going to start out with is making our dashi broth. So I'm going to, I have this secondary pot here on the oven, and I'm going to grab our dashi ingredients. Dashi is a traditional Japanese broth, just includes water and 2 ingredients. It is a broth that tastes of the sea, so in contrast to Western European recipes where they often use broths that are meat-based, Japan is an island nation, and the broth that forms the base of many of their recipes tastes like the ocean. So it has 2 ingredients. The first is a kelp called kombu. I'm just using kitchen shears and cutting a square of this kelp. You can see I have a big package of this, so this is kind of a large piece, but when you get it, it will come in a plastic package, and it'll just be kind of folded up pieces of kelp layered over each other. And you just need a square of it that's like 3 to 4 inches square. You can see, especially on this package, this has a lot of minerals on it. When you buy this kelp, it often has kind of like a dusty look, and that is just the natural salts and minerals from the sea from when they dry it. So you don't need to wash it off. You actually want that flavor. So what I'm going to do to start out our broth is just throw this piece of kelp into my pot and turn it up on high and bring it to a boil. That is the wrong burner. Right. Still haven't quite used the stove all that much, my new stove, so there we go. Okay, and you can have this totally on high. You want it to boil as quickly as possible.
Greenhouse is back to excellent, so there might have been some buffering for the last few minutes.
I don't think I need my scissors anymore. So our second ingredient for the dashi, we're not going to add until it boils, but it looks like this. It's called either bonito flakes or katsuobushi, and it is dried flakes of tuna. So basically what they do is they dry and smoke loins of tuna until they are solid, like you can bang them on the counter and they would be rock hard, and then they use a very sharp razor to shave them into these very, very fine flakes. So when you smell your bonito flakes, they have a definite smoky smell, so it kind of, this sounds maybe gross, but it kind of smells like fish bacon. You may or may not think that's gross. I think that's a perfect description of what this smells like, though. So it has a rich, smoky flavor, but also definitely a very strong fish aroma. So this is the other ingredient that creates the dashi. And when we're going to add this in, you don't want to cook your bonito flakes. So what we're going to do is bring our water to a boil with the kelp in it. And then we're going to pull the kelp out as soon as we see it boiling. You don't want to boil the kelp because it will create a kind of an unpleasant like thickness to the broth. Almost gets like slightly slimy if you let it boil. So as soon as it comes to a boil, we're going to pull the kelp out, and then we're going to turn it off, and we're going to add our bonito flakes, and then just let it rest for a few minutes while we carry on with our soup. A cool thing about learning how to make dashi is that a lot of people really enjoy miso soup and always go out to restaurants and order it whenever they go out to restaurants. Once you know how to make dashi, which is very simple, as I'm explaining here, all you do to create miso soup is heat up your dashi broth and whisk in miso paste. And then whatever other ingredients you want. At a restaurant, it often has little cubes of tofu and maybe a few pieces of seaweed and a few pieces of green onion, but that's really all there is to it. Make dashi broth, whisk in miso, you've got miso soup. So it's a handy little thing to know. For this particular soup, I just want to note this. I'm making a very, very light flavored dashi, so it is not a standard dashi. A standard dashi, you usually would use 1 cup of bonito flakes to a quart of water, 4 cups of water. And you can see here we're using 6 cups of water and only 3/4 of a cup of bonito flake. That's just because I don't want this soup to make people go, oh, it tastes like fish. I want it to taste like squash with just a hint of something in the background. If you are especially sensitive to fishy things, you could even use a little bit less, like tone it down to even a 1/2 cup instead of 3/4 of a cup. So I'll leave that up to you. One other thing I wanted to note, and I do have it listed on the recipe, is that if you don't want to have these 2 ingredients hanging out in your pantry, another product you can buy is a product called hondashi powder, and it is basically the equivalent of chicken bouillon. So it's little granules. The brand name is hondashi. I think it's an Ajinomoto product, which is the people who make MSG. These are all very MSG, very glutamate-filled ingredients. The kelp and the bonito have tons of glutamates in them, so they make everything taste really, really savory. But you can look for that hondashi product at your Asian markets. They have granules, and they also have like little tea bags. So those are other ways to quickly come up with dashi, but it's pretty simple even to make from scratch. I'm going to go ahead and I'll just set this over here, and I'm going to keep an eye on that pan. Again, as I mentioned, we want it to come to a boil, but we don't want it to boil for an extended period with the kelp in there. So meanwhile, we can start our main pot of soup here. So I'm going to turn this big pot on. You can turn it on to maybe medium heat. And I will get some oil in there.
Greta says if it's chicken bouillon, why not just use that?
Well, Greta has asked why we're not using chicken bouillon. So I wasn't meaning to say that it is chicken bouillon. I meant to say it is the Japanese equivalent of chicken bouillon. Tastes completely different, nothing alike. So if you want your soup to have Japanese flavor, definitely want to go with the dashi. It's just like the equivalent. Hondashi is like the equivalent in Japan of chicken bouillon. Although actually in Japan they use chicken bouillon all the time too. They put it on French fries and everything. It's really quite good. Okay, so got my oil heating up. Let's go ahead and clean our leeks. Sorry, I just need to look at this recipe. Well, that is very funny. I just realized something. I prepped an onion, and there is no onion. I was certain there was an onion. I even have it peeled and cut and ready to go. There's no onion, there's just leeks. I do not need this onion. All right, I guess I'll use that at my house. Okay, it says 1 large leek. I had 1 kind of medium leek and 1 small leek left over in my bunch, so that's what I'm using. And I just wanted to note, when you're cleaning leeks, it's very important to clean them thoroughly because they tend to have sand get embedded in their layers as they grow. So I have already cut off the root ends, and I've trimmed off the dark green parts already because we don't need those. But what I like to do is take each of these, and I leave like an inch or 2 of the dark green kind of like as a handle, and then I'm just going to take and cut down right through the center so that I can open this all the way up. Okay, I'm going to do that on both of them. But if you leave that little handle of green, it makes things easier. And then what you really want to do is go over to your sink if you haven't already done this. This one looks pretty clean, but I just like to be on the safe side, and really like bend these open and wash in there really, really well. So I'm going to go do that really quick. Okay, so I've opened these all up. I've rinsed them really, really well. Our soup is going to boil here at any moment, but I'm keeping an eye on it. And now they are ready to chop. So I'm actually going to go ahead and cut lengthwise the other way so that I end up cutting it into quarters lengthwise. The soup is going to be pureed, so everything that we cut up here doesn't have to be cut up super small because we're going to puree it. So I'm cutting maybe 1/2 to 3/4 inch chunks of leek, and then I'm just going to stop there where I reached my little handle ends, and we're done with that. Okay, let me grab a tongs. I'm going to go ahead and pluck out that piece of kelp now that the broth is at a boil. So just pluck that out of there, discard it, you don't need it anymore. And I'm going to measure our bonito flakes into the broth, and I'm going to turn it off. They're kind of fluffy, so just do your best to give a pretty good measurement. Okay, so bonito flakes are in there. I'm turning off the burner. And then you can just cover that if you want to. And just let it sit while we carry on with our soup. I turned this burner off for a brief second because I realized I was talking for too long, but it's probably still hot. There you go, burner. All right, so again, I have my oil in here over medium. I'm gonna add my leeks. Maybe not quite as hot as I thought. That's okay. It'll come back to being hot here in just a second. We can get our carrots ready. So I just have 2 carrots. I'm gonna peel them. I'm just going to peel them right into my garbage that I have below me here. So the carrots are going to add some nice sweetness and color along with our squash, just to give our soup a great flavor. Okay, I think that's the last thing oh no, I do need to peel my apple. Okay. This carrot has a little weird spot where it's just like, I don't know, it looks a little dirty, so let's Let's cut that off. And again, I'm going to chop these up, but they don't need to be chopped up super small. I might even just do halves like that. Still really laughing at myself about this onion, you guys. I don't know what I was thinking. I was so certain there was an onion in this soup. And the last thing we want to put in here is a few garlic cloves. These aren't peeled yet. Again, this makes this all go more quickly since we are pureeing this. You don't have to worry about how these are really cut up. So I'm just cutting off the ends, and then I'm going to use the side of my knife to smash them. That will remove the peel for you and kind of open up the insides all at once. And they can just go right into your pot. All right. One more ingredient for this saute part is some ginger. And we need maybe around 1.5 inches of this ginger root for right now. And then we also need a little bit more for our slaw. So I'm going to peel about 2 inches of it. Starting to smell good already. Really, really like the smell of leeks. Leeks are one of my favorite. Okay, so I have this peeled, and I'm just going to slice coins up to about 1.5 inches worth of this ginger. Like so, and you can throw those in as well. That is everything that's going in this part. We're just going to let that saute for a few minutes, maybe about 5 minutes. And you don't really want the leeks to get brown or anything else to get brown. The leeks are the thing that would be most likely to get brown though if you had it up too high. So just saute it. If you see it getting brown, turn it down a little bit, and it should be good to go. Keep an eye on it. We might need to stir it just once. Doesn't need to be managed that much. So while that is sauteing, we have our dashi broth ready to go. We're going to strain it into here once these are ready. But in the meanwhile, we can get our tofu ready. So if you are making the tofu part, here we go. We're going to do it. I haven't done anything to this tofu yet. You can see I'm just opening the package. Most recipes for tofu call you to press it, and this one doesn't, and that's one of the reasons I like it so much. So I've opened up a slit, and I'm going to take this over to the sink and drain off the liquid.
Doesn't tofu come in different qualities or
It does.
different amounts of water?
It comes in different softnesses. And this works best with firm or extra firm. This particular one is extra firm. But you can see it's very moist, and if I squeezed it much at all, a bunch of water would kind of pour out, which is why most people press it before they cook it. But I have a little trick here. I really like this recipe. So I'm going to dice it, and I'm going to dice it fairly small. So every tofu brand is a slightly different shape, but for this size one, if you have a brick like this, I cut it this direction into thirds. So what I'm going for here is like about 1/2 inch cubes, which I think works just right for this. So there you can see I sliced it into 3. And then do your best to kind of do that same size when you slice it this direction. It's a 1/2 inch or maybe a little bit bigger than a 1/2 inch. But you want them to be you don't want a bunch of big ones and a bunch of little ones. You want them to be pretty similar in size. And then again, turn it around one more turn and slice it again, and we will have our nice little cubes. I have a bowl ready to go, and it has just a few layers of paper towel in the bottom, like so. So just gently pick up your tofu cubes and transfer them in there right onto the paper towel. And this is not pressing it, but it is helping us to drain off a little bit of the water right off the bat. Kind of get it in there into, it's not going to be in a single layer, but kind of spread out as evenly as you can. I'm just going to set this aside for like 5 minutes. Let me clean up my cutting board just a second. Okay. And you know what I'm actually going to do? You can do this at home if you want to. I'm actually going to grab that paper toweling up and just move it to a different plate because I want to mix up our... No, I'm not going to do that. Never mind. Just ignore me. I thought I was going to like get ahead of myself, and then I realized that's just kind of silly. So never mind. Skip that. Let's see. Just a quick reminder. I mentioned this at the beginning of class, but hopefully you have your squash peeled and cut into large chunks. I'm using a butternut squash tonight. I have made this with all 3 of the squashes that I listed. I've made it with curry, K-U-R-I squash. I've made it with kabocha squash, which is like a traditional Japanese squash. It's often called Japanese pumpkin. And I made it with butternut. And as we're coming out of winter, it gets a little harder to find the non-butternut squash. So today I have butternut, and that's great. It works perfectly for this. Okay, I think we are good to go here on our next step of soup. So let's go ahead and proceed. So I have my sauteed, it's almost like a slightly Asian mirepoix going on here in the pan. And I have my pot of dashi, which is not on, it's just sitting there. So when you open that up, your dashi pot, it's probably going to have a very smoky seafood aroma, but it's going to look like a very pale, just slightly golden looking broth. You want to just grab a strainer of some sort. I think that'll sit in there. And we're just going to strain this warm broth. A little hot. I think I can do it. We're just going to strain this through the strainer right into our soup, and the bonito flakes that are captured in the strainer, we're just going to discard. Like so. Okay. We're just going to add our squash and a little bit of salt. So here's our squash. Everyone's going to have a slightly different sized squash, but hopefully you found a squash that was around 2 pounds. And I like to put in around a teaspoon of salt at this point. Keeping in mind we are adding miso paste, so that is quite salty as well. So you don't want to over salt it at this point. But I think a little bit is nice in here. All right. All that needs to happen with our soup at this point is it needs to come up to a simmer, and we need to simmer it until the squash and the carrots are soft. Soft enough to puree, so quite soft. So I'm going to put the lid on askew so I can kind of keep an eye on what it's doing, but it will help it heat up faster. Like so. You can turn it up really high right now if you just want to bring it to a boil as quickly as possible. Which is what I'm going to do, but I'll keep an eye on it. Okay, so really, basically, except for a few seasonings that we put in at the end and then we puree it, this soup is done. It just needs to simmer. All right, we're going to shift gears back to our tofu, which has now had several minutes to sit on top of the paper towel and absorb some of that water that's in the tofu. So you can go ahead, I'm kind of just using the edges of the towel to blot this off from the top layer a little bit, but it's fine. Whatever amount of water you manage to get off of there will help. There's definitely a lot of water in the paper towel, so that's great. So I just have my bowl of tofu cubes, and we're going to add vegetable oil. It's not a small, it's 2 tablespoons, so it's not a small amount of vegetable oil, but you'll see here in a moment that we're going to toss it with this, but then we're going to pick it up and let the extra marinade kind of drain off, so you won't actually be cooking the tofu or eating the tofu with the full 2 tablespoons. It's just that you need that amount to coat it properly. And I'm using grapeseed oil, but just use whatever neutral tasting vegetable oil you have at your house. And then we need some soy sauce. That just gives this a good seasoning and a nice savory flavor. Again, same exact thing with the oil in this. 2 tablespoons is a lot of soy sauce, but most of it is going to drain off. Okay, and then we're going to add a tablespoon of cornstarch. And that will help us create a crispy coating. It's going to look real kind of dicey when you put this in here, like it's not going to coat it properly, but just sprinkle it as evenly over there as you can, and it will work. It will work out fine. And then if you like, completely optional, but I like a little pinch of cayenne in here. Or you could do whatever seasonings appeal to you for whatever you're using the tofu for. For example, if you want to make some crispy tofu to go on something that tastes Italian, you could sprinkle some Italian seasoning on here, or some ground fennel, or whatever you like. But for tonight, we're just going with soy and a pinch of cayenne. Okay, I'm gonna go just wash my hands one more time, just because I like to wash my hands really well before I do any of that type of stuff. I'll be right back. And I'm going to grab a sheet pan, which I have ready to go over here. Just kind of set that right there. I can hear my soup boiling for sure, so you don't need it at a hard boil. So if you hear it really boiling, or see it really boiling, you can turn it down so it's just at a gentle simmer. Okay, you may be asking yourself, why are you using your hands when you could just use a spoon? The tofu, because it hasn't been pressed, is very moist and very delicate. So you can use a spoon if you want to, but you might start to break it apart into little bits. So that's why I like to use my hands for this. So I'm gonna almost use like a folding motion. Let me see if I can get that on camera. Like if my hand was a spatula, I'm going along the side of the bowl just to get everything evenly coated with this strange mixture. And I think that looks pretty good. I don't see any pockets of cornstarch anymore. It's all evenly coated. And then same thing, if you try to lift this out with a utensil or with like tongs, it can easily break apart. But you want to lift it out gently and kind of let it drain and let the marinade drain off somewhat. So there's not a huge amount of marinade sitting on your sheet pan. And that's kind of one of the keys to helping this get a little more crispy in the oven, is that we have seasoned it, but then we're not putting it on the sheet pan in a whole bunch of liquid where it would just kind of steam. So hopefully you can see what I'm doing there at home. This recipe, I don't think I wrote down the lady's name, but this recipe for tofu made this way was recently posted by Bon Appetit magazine, but it was not their recipe. They like posted it from a different cookbook author. And I apologize, I can't remember her name right now. I should have mentioned that. So I made it following exactly the recipe that they posted, and it wasn't quite right for me. The recipe doesn't say to get rid of the excess marinade, and so the first time I made it, it ended up with lots of liquid. So I kind of adapted it from some lady who I can't remember right now, but if you saw it in Bon Appetit, if you get their emails, it was posted maybe 2 months ago, like the best tofu cubes ever, and I agree, with a little bit of work, it is the best tofu cubes.
Point that at this camera and see how much, I want to see how much
Oh,
marinade
yeah.
is left.
Scott's saying, show how much liquid is left in this bowl, and you can see there's quite a lot. So of those 2 tablespoons oil and 2 tablespoons soy sauce, a lot of it is still in the bowl. Okay, rinse my hand off. Once your soup has come up to a simmer and your tofu is ready to go, the tofu takes about the same amount of time to cook in the oven as the soup takes to get tender, so that's kind of handy. I'm going to go put this in the oven. My timer's being crazy. Okay, there we go. It's going right. Okay. I set the timer for 12 minutes because I want to take a spatula and run it under the tofu and kind of try to flip it over about halfway through. So we're going to cook the tofu and the soup for about 20 to 25 minutes at this point. I keep hearing my soup because I have the lid mostly all the way on. Yeah, it's really boiling. But then, of course, I turn it down and it's not doing anything. I need it to be just right. All right, that's fine. We'll keep an eye on it. All right, so we have got our soup simmering, we've got our tofu roasting. We just need to prepare the final ingredients for the soup that are just going to be added in at the end right before we puree it. And then we need to prepare our slaw. Let's do our slaw first. This slaw has a little bit of cabbage, a little bit of green onion, and then 1 whole apple. And then it's coated in a lovely gingery dressing, so it's very tasty. We're going to start with the apple, and I'm going to do a little trick here, which is to let the apple soak just for a few minutes in salt water. You can let your apple soak in salt water or acidulated water, and both of those things will help prevent it from browning because we're going to peel it. But I have this feeling, and I haven't actually done a side-by-side taste test, but I feel like the salt water slightly makes the apple crispier, which is really nice for slaw. So I'm going with salt water. So I have 2 cups of water in this bowl, and I'm going to put 1 teaspoon of salt in there. And then we're going to julienne our apple. Let's see, do I have a julienne slicer? You guys, hilariously, I don't think I have a julienne slicer. I need to take one of those out of stock, but I will show you how to do it by hand because most people don't have a julienne slicer. Well, I don't know if most people do or not, but some people don't have a julienne slicer. But either way, we're going to start out the same way, which is we're definitely going to peel the apple all the way while it's still whole. So actually, what I usually do is I cut off the two ends just a tiny, tiny bit. Just so I have two flat ends. And then I use my peeler and just go down the sides. And it just makes it really quick and easy. I like a crunchy, sweet apple for this. Like a Honey Crisp would be really nice. Something like that, a Fuji. There's lots of options. Okay, it's peeled. If you have a julienne slicer or a mandolin, that would be the fastest way to deal with this. And what you would do is picture where the core is, and you would slice the four sides around the core. So I would like hold it like this, and I would use my slicer all the way until it just got to the core, and then I would turn it 90 degrees and do that again and do that 4 times until all I had left was just a square core. And that's basically what we're going to do now also. It's just going to be a lot more work. So set your apple down on the counter and cut right next to where you think the core is for your first cut. There's one chunk. And then you can put it down on that cut side and do that again, going again right to the right of where you think the core is. Again, flip it over, right to the right of where you think the core is, flip it over, last cut, right to the right of where you think the core is. You don't end up wasting very much apple that way, and it makes all of your pieces of apple easier to deal with because they have flat sides. Okay, so julienning by hand. Here we go, it's fun. Slice as thinly as you can and or want to, but try to do it evenly. That is in the way. So I'm going to take each piece and slice it fairly thin. That was a bad cut. Oh well. And then I'm going to make a little pile of those. Luckily, apples stick together pretty well, so they're not super dangerous when you make a big pile of them. They don't slide around much. And I have them piled up, and I'm going to again slice right through them just like I just did. And that gives you little juliennes or matchsticks of apple, like so. Those can go into your salty water. Give that a little stir. Hopefully the salt is dissolved in there. Okay, so that was our smallest piece. Now these ones are going to be a little bigger. So I might actually make 2 piles of these ones. I don't think I'm going to pile up a giant stack of apples when I julienne them. Here's a little trick that I can show you, which I wasn't doing before, but now I'm going to start doing it, so see if you notice the difference. I was chopping up and down, right? And they were kind of falling all over the place. If you use the tip of your knife and drag it backwards, the apples will stay right where they were. Magic. So that's very handy when you need to stack something up and keep on cutting it because it's already stacked up for you. Whoa. All right. There's that stack. Again, I already had cut those. Slicing them into juliennes. These aren't super fine juliennes, but that's perfect for this. Okay, again, let me show you that one more time if you didn't quite catch what was going on there. Instead of chopping up and down, I'm going to use the tip of my knife and drag it backwards so that my apple slices stay where I want them to stay. This is a great technique anytime you need to slice up things that are, like, I use it a lot for melon, if I want to make like nice little slices of melon. I guess things that are wet that would tend to stick to your knife and then fly all over the place. If you use that dragging technique, you won't have as much of a problem. Okay, one more piece. Our final biggest piece of apple. So this is our biggest piece, so I'm probably going to end up with like 3 or 4 stacks here to do my julienne. So there you go, little miniature knife skills class as a part of this class. All right, so I have 2 funny things about this slaw for what I'm making. Number 1, the dressing calls for rice vinegar, and that would absolutely be my first choice. I have been out of rice vinegar at my house, which I use a lot, by the way, going on the 4th week now, because every time I go to Winco, they're out of it. They only have the seasoned one. I don't want the seasoned one. I'm not going to buy the seasoned one. And I've been kind of busy lately, so I haven't been interested in hunting around at a bunch of different stores. Yeah. So, hopefully you have rice vinegar, but I don't have rice vinegar. So I'm using apple cider vinegar. Still gonna taste great. Secondly, normally I like to use Napa cabbage for this slaw, but the Napa cabbages at the store I went to were those giant monster Napa cabbages that are like, and I just was not into buying one because we're going away this weekend and I knew I would have tons left over and I was not into it. So I happened to have like 1/3 of a green cabbage at my house, just a regular green cabbage, so that's what I'm using and it's gonna be great. But normally I like to make the slaw with rice vinegar and Napa cabbage if I have that available. We can just set these apples aside for a moment to soak in the salt water while we get the last few things done. The stove is seriously driving me crazy right now. I cannot get this to stay at just a gentle simmer. What the heck? We're just gonna like boil the heck out of it. It'll just get soft faster that way. So let's make our little dressing for our salad. So you can just choose whichever bowl you're going to serve this in and make the dressing right in the bottom of that bowl. Again, normally I'd be using rice vinegar, but I'm using apple cider vinegar tonight. So a tablespoon of that. And then a teaspoon of toasted sesame oil. This recipe calls for, ooh, that almost overflowed, but it didn't quite. This recipe calls for a teaspoon of toasted sesame oil plus 2 teaspoons of regular oil, which means if you take into account the tablespoon of vinegar, you're using equal parts vinegar and oil. But the reason I do it this way is because if you used a tablespoon of sesame oil, it would be gross. Because that would be too much sesame flavor. So we're just using 1/3 sesame oil plus 2/3 unflavored oil to create our little vinaigrette here. And then the only other ingredient in this little vinaigrette is just some grated ginger. Let's see, there we go. Just scrape this right over the bowl. And I'm carrying the timer for my tofu, but I'm going to...
It's boiling pretty fast now.
I know, but it's just crazy. I'm going to just get that ginger done. Oh, soup. You're so crazy. Okay, and then we'll go look at our tofu. And I'm sure it's ready to turn, so I'm going to take a little thin spatula with me. And I'm just gonna keep the, well, maybe we'll bring it over here. It would be nice to see it on camera. All right, I'll bring it over here. Okay. Sizzle. So here's what it looks like after, I believe I put the timer for 12 minutes. Oh, thank you. And it will probably be sticking to the pan right now. So that's why I grab my thin spatula, and I'm really going to do my best to kind of delicately just go through and scrape so that it is no longer sticking. Don't fuss around with it a whole bunch because you don't want to break it up, but just do go through and release it from the pan as much as you can. And then once it's all released, you can kind of gently flip the various pieces over. You're never going to get them all perfectly flipped over because that's just crazy, but do your best to kind of flip them. All right. And then make sure they are, once again, arranged in a single layer. And we'll put them back in the oven for the remaining 12 minutes. Thanks. Okay. So you can see, hopefully, and hopefully if you're making this at home, it's working out well for you, that the tofu is looking really yummy. I have never really been much of a tofu person, except when I was in Japan and had fresh tofu. That's the most delicious thing in the entire world. But in general, I was never like, oh, tofu, I want to put it on everything. It's a great substitute for meat. I've always been like, no, it's not at all a substitute for meat. It's just kind of boring. But cooked this way, I actually quite enjoy it. And it's nice and savory and has a little crispy outside, and it just tastes really good. Erin and I have been eating a very healthy meal regularly these days, where we tend to have nice, just kind of tomato sauce that we freeze in freezer bags during tomato season, all kind of ready to go. Just a very simple, like tomato and garlic only sauce in our freezer. And then I make zoodles. How healthy is that? So zucchini noodles. I saute those really quickly with some garlic and olive oil, put the tomato sauce on, and sprinkle it with this roasted tofu, and I'm like the healthiest person in the world. So it's very unlike me, but we've really been enjoying it. So I am now a fan of tofu, I guess. Here's our little vinegar dressing. Did I just say vinegar dressing? I meant to say ginger dressing. And that's super simple, just 4 ingredients. We can slice up our green onions and our cabbage. I've actually already sliced my cabbage, but you should slice up your cabbage if you have not already. Because I had the heartier green cabbage as opposed to Napa cabbage, I wanted to shave it in the food processor so that it was really nice and thin. But I didn't want to use the food processor on camera because it's so noisy. So I shaved it a little bit before class. That was a weird looking piece. So you can basically just go ahead, thinly slice your cabbage if you have not already cut it up, or maybe you just bought a little bag of coleslaw mix at the store, whatever you're using. We really only need 3 cups of this. So I have a little extra. That's probably about 3 cups. Maybe I'll take that home in a little container. I don't want to have too much cabbage in there because the amount of dressing is just right. So you can put that right on top of your dressing. Don't stir it up yet. And then I have 2 green onions here ready to slice. Just slice those as thinly as you can.
So Terry says, cook the zucchini noodles in the basil and garlic grapeseed oil you carry at Mama Dollar Kitchen.
I know she loves that.
Everything is yummier in that.
Terry, I know that's your favorite product, and I tell people about it all the time. When they're kind of hemming and hawing over what they should buy, I say, you know, we have this customer here. She's one of our favorite customers, and this is her favorite product on our food shelf, and she says she swears it's the most delicious product that we sell, and it makes everything taste better. So I hear ya. If the rest of you are interested what this delicious thing is, it's actually a grapeseed oil that we sell as opposed to an olive oil. You might expect it to be an olive oil, but it's a grapeseed oil that is infused with basil and garlic, and it's really, really yummy, and it makes everything seem kind of it's just easy to make something delicious because it has such a good flavor just on its own. So that's a great idea for sauteing your zoodles or anything else. Okay, we have cabbage and green onions in here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed one question.
Oops.
I think this is Terry also. Can I use parchment paper under the tofu?
Oh, yes. Sorry we missed that question about using parchment under the tofu. I would suggest not, because actually, it sounds weird to say, but you almost kind of want it to stick like it does so that it gets crispier. So if you use parchment, it will be easier to deal with, but it won't be quite as crispy. So I had these apples just sitting in salted water for maybe 10 minutes, and we can go ahead and get them out of there now, and just kind of shaking them off. I don't feel like you need to like pat them dry or anything, just shake them off pretty well. And you can get this slaw all ready to go. What I like to do is just have it sitting here all in a pile like this, but don't stir it until you're going to serve it. And that way it just keeps everything nice and crunchy and doesn't get limp. So this is ready to go aside from being tossed, and we'll set it over here. Let's look at our soup. See if it's tender. It's been cooking pretty hard due to my inability to regulate the temperature here. So I'm just taking a spoon and smashing some of the squash against the side, and it is definitely squashing. And so is the carrot. So I would say we can think about continuing on and finishing up our recipe. So hopefully at home, make sure it really is completely squashable like that. It's like a silly play on words, but if it's only slightly tender, like it would be good to eat, but not completely squishable like that, then when you try to puree it, it will have little like bits instead of being smooth. So really make sure it is completely soft. Okay. At this point, you can go ahead and turn it off if you have a gas burner, or actually remove it from the heat if you're using electric. But I'm just going to turn it off there, and we're just going to add in a few ingredients. We are going to add in miso paste. Probably can't see that from because I have it in this container. I tend to buy this miso paste that comes in this floppy bag, so I have a little good sealing container that I store it in at my house. But you want about 2 tablespoons of miso paste. And miso paste comes in all sorts of different colors, and it's traditionally made with soybeans, but there are companies out there that make alternative bean misos. So all of them will work. They'll just be slightly different. This is a white miso, which is the mildest one. So that's the one I generally keep in my house just because it's very versatile. It doesn't look white. White miso is not actually white, but it is the lightest flavored one. Go wash my hands for a second. Okay, we are going to put in some lemon and a little bit of sugar. So I like, lemon zest isn't really a very Japanesey ingredient, but it's hard for me to ever put lemon juice in something without putting lemon zest in, because I'm just like, why not? Might as well give it a little more flavor. So I'm zesting this lemon before I use it. I just think it makes everything taste better. And this is a small lemon. It says zest of 1 lemon, but if you have a gargantuan lemon, you might not want to use all of that. And then I'm probably going to use about half of the juice of this lemon. You want around a tablespoon to start out with. That was a juicy lemon. My soup might be a little tangy. We'll see. And then some brown sugar. And this is just to kind of balance everything else really nicely. It's not a lot. It's just a teaspoon only. But it just, like I said, it just kind of balances everything out. And this is kind of optional, but I love the combination of butter and miso. I just think it tastes really good together, so I like to throw in 1 pat of butter into the soup before I puree it. The only other thing that we may end up adding is some salt, but let's definitely puree it first and see how it tastes. So you can use either an immersion blender or a stick blender if you have that. It's definitely easier. It won't get quite as pureed, but it does a pretty good job. Or if you're one of those lucky people who has like a really great Vitamix blender, whatever blender you have, use your blender. If you are using a stick blender, something I suggest is to put a piece of plastic wrap over this. Gee whiz, here we go. And then you can just take your knife and stab a hole in it, and that prevents things from spattering. So here is the noisy part of class. I am going to puree this completely. So, pardon me. Oops. Oh yeah, my blender has a safety feature that I hate. Okay. Let me say, because I want to make sure no one injures themselves, this soup is quite hot, and if you are using a regular blender with a jar, first of all, only fill it up halfway for each batch, and then just be very careful and very delicate when you are turning it on, and you may want to open the little center thing in your lid and put a towel over it, because hot soup in a blender has a tendency to be somewhat explosive. So if you've ever had that happen or ever seen it happen, it can be quite dangerous actually. So make sure you're taking those safety precautions if you're using a jar blender. Stick blender, it's fine. Our tofu is beeping. I'm just gonna go over there and actually just turn the oven off and let it sit. And then we'll take a look at it in just a second. Okay, so carrying on with the blending. You can puree this as much or as little as you want, but I like it pretty much pureed all the way. take a look. When you're using a stick blender like this, so I think I can get this plastic wrap off of here now. It's fine. Sometimes when you're using a stick blender like this, you think it's all pureed, and then you find one big squashed chunk still in there. But, oh, see, there's one. That's what I'm talking about. One big squash chunk. I think that might be the only one. Let's see if we can get that one out of there. I'm pretty sure I got it. All right, I like the texture of this soup. I mean, in terms of how much liquid it has in it, it looks just right to me. It's possible if your squash was a slightly different size, it might be too thick. And if that is the case, you can just stir in a little bit of water. If it's too thin, there's not that much you can do, and it'll just be a slightly thinner soup. I'm going to taste it, and the things that you might want to adjust are salt. Obviously, if it doesn't taste salty enough. You could add more lemon if it just tastes kind of dull. And if it doesn't taste sweet enough to your taste buds, the squash and carrot are pretty sweet, but if it doesn't taste sweet enough, you could always add a little bit more brown sugar. It tastes really good to me. I'm not adding anything. Okay, let's grab our tofu. All right, here is what our tofu looks like after the second half of cooking. Again, use a thin spatula. This one's really thin. And just get under there. This stuff smells so good. I think it's like the smell of roasted soy sauce. It's a really good smell to me. I like it a lot. Okay, these will feel tender with crispy edges, and as they sit out for a few minutes, they'll actually get crispier. So we'll just set those aside. We are going to toss our slaw here that is all ready to go. Would have been helpful if I'd chosen a slightly bigger bowl, but this is fine. This slaw, the only thing we haven't put on this yet is salt. So once you get it tossed in the dressing, just see if it needs a little salt. I didn't put that in the recipe. I'm so sorry. Add a little note, don't forget to salt your slaw if it needs it. The apples are a little salty, which is kind of fun. Whoever tasted a salty apple before? I enjoy it. So it may not need as much salt as you might expect. It needs a little bit though. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and plate up a bowl of this. Whoa. So there's our soup. You can almost think of the tofu as like croutons. And then top it with a nice little heap of the slaw. I kind of put it off to one side like so, I don't know. And you can have some soup without slaw and some soup with slaw. And if you like, you can garnish with something with sesame seeds in it. So it could just be sesame seeds. This is a Japanese chili powder blend that has sesame seeds in it called shichimi togarashi. That's what I use. And it's red, so it looks pretty on here. Another option, if you like seaweed, would be like a furikake seasoning. This is seaweed and sesame seeds mixed together, so lots of options. All right, here is our finished product tonight. And again, if you would prefer to have the slaw not on the hot soup, totally great, just serve it on the side. So I hope you all enjoyed our final winter soup class tonight, and hopefully those of you out there who are cooking along with us have a delicious dinner to eat at your house. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you, honestly, if this is our last online class, thank you so much for your support over these last 2 years. It's been pretty weird. And so thank you for being willing to join these classes and do something different. I really appreciate it. And yeah, obviously come on into the store if you need any of these items that I used tonight. We are happy to help you, and we are still currently open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., which is probably what it's going to remain for a while, at least. Does anybody have any questions before we finish off tonight?
I'm not seeing any.
No questions. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. And I hope you have a great evening and a great spring. Good night.